Hello students. Yes, in my previous video I had explained on 4 principles of sound financial planning. So in this video I'll take up another 5 principles of sound financial planning. So it was discussed upon simplicity. What does simplicity mean? Whenever you are making a financial plan, it should be always simple and clear to ensure the understanding. What is clear cut objectives? Clear cut objectives is where the financial planning, without reference to the objectives of the firm, it doesn't have any meaning or the relevance. So always make sure while you're planning you have a clear cut objectives over the plan what you have made, right? So the objectives must always be clear and unambiguous. Fine. So the next step what we discussed is on flexibility. Flexibility is all about a financial plan shouldn't be rigid, it should be like a flexible, right? So what is flexibility? Capable of being adjusted according to the needs and circumstances of the firm. The next step what we discussed was on long term view. Long term view is where a financial plan, it should always be formulated keeping in the view the long term needs of the organization. What are the long term needs that is required for the firm, rather than finding the easiest way of obtaining the sources of getting the capital. And always when the financial planner is looking for the long term view, the organization must focus upon the long term survival and the growth. Fine. So now we shall go ahead with the 5th principle. It talks about foresight. What does foresight talk about? Listen to me carefully. See, the financial plan should be prepared keeping in view the future requirements, right? Foresight is something on today you are able to, estimate. You are going to predict what are the requirements that I need to have in terms of capital for the business, right? So a financial plan which doesn't consider the future needs of the organization, it is very short sighted, where you are not going to focus towards the future needs. What are the needs that you need to have it in your organization? But when it comes to the long term view, the foresight, we always look upon the future requirements of capital. As on today being in 2020, if I have to estimate for the 2021 2022, how will I even do it? I have to estimate it based on the past records, based on the past finance decisions that I have taken, right? So always a financial plan need to consider the future needs of the organization. Fine. And it could put the firm in serious financial crisis in the future, and put it for very survival of the organization under a risk. What is risk? Risk is something which is predictable, right? Say for example, you have factors of a risk and factor of uncertainty. Now what is risk? Risk is something where you're sure of incurring that event, where you can predict something, right? Uncertainty is something you can't predict, you're not sure of that occurring of the event. Where risk, if I have to give an example, see, you're a say for example XYZ is a person where he is going to enter the market. Fine. So there are so many companies which is already available in the prevailing existing market. If he wants to enter the market, the competitive market, do you think, as an as a he's just keeping a infant steps in the market, so do you think he is going to make a profit, super profits, or he's going to get the profit itself in the first year? Definitely no. Here he has to undergo the risk, and this risk is already estimated. When you're fresh, when you're new to the market, you will have to spend lots of money on advertising, on marketing. You will have to give free samples, you have to give the demo, right, on your product. All these matter. So all these are risk, and all these risks are estimated, all these risks are expected. So initially a new company, it has to undergo the loss, so that risk of loss is predictable, right? So likewise you need to have a proper foresight about your future requirements of the firm. Fine. The next principle what we have is on a liquidity. What does liquidity talk about? Liquidity is nothing but how easily the assets can be converted into cash, how readily the cash is available. Fine. What does financial plan do here? What's the major role it is going to play? See, financial planning, it should ensure the liquidity and solvency of the enterprise. Now, what is solvency? Where if the organization has borrowed the money from the outsiders, it should be in a position to pay back. That is solvent. Insolvency is where the company has given up. The company doesn't have money. It doesn't own assets in order to pay the money back. It doesn't have anything, right? So, it always financial planning, it ensures the liquidity and the solvency of the enterprise, where if you have adequate liquidity, I'm going to say like sufficient or more liquidity, it enables the firm to meet its obligations on time. If it has to make the payment to the outsiders, it can be in form of cash, it can be in form of a credit, a loan borrowed, you will have to pay the interest, right? So when you have sufficient or excess liquidity, the cash, what is going to happen? It enables the firm in order to meet the obligations, the duties on time, and of course it gives a degree to the third point, which is called as a flexibility. Fine. So the solvency always ensures that the firm continues to function and survive for a long duration. As I told, it's a perpetual succession. Fine. The next factor what you have, the principle, is contingencies. Now what does contingencies talk about? See, the financial plan should keep in view the requirement of funds for contingencies, like which can arise in the future. You never know, anything can happen in the future. So the financial plan, it is going to act as an aid or a barometer in order to look for the requirements of funds for contingencies, which is going to likely to arise in the future. So as I told in the previous point, the foresight, all kinds of business, whether it is small business, a big business, when I use the term big small, I'm talking in terms of capital. Fine. So all kinds of business, they face a risk. Of course, they face the uncertainty, right? So a firm needs adequate finance to overcome such difficulties. They need, of course. So a firm should make adequate provision in its financial plan. And how you are going to allocate, how are you going to make a provision? See, when you are able to perform your operations, day-to-day operations clearly, if you're working absolutely well with your objectives, with your short-term as well as long-term objectives, you'll be able to fetch the money, you'll be able to mint the money or generate the income. When you have got written in, which is called as profits, to your organization, out of that, first you are going to pay a portion of your profits to your debenture holders in form of interest. Then you will pay it to the preference shareholders in form of fixed dividend. At last, whatever is left, it should be given to the equity shareholders, basically the owners of the organization. Then you are going to retain some of the earnings, and where you are going to keep it as a provision. You will keep that funds idle where you are not going to use it. Someday as a deferred consumption it can be used. I mean to say, if there's any kind of uncertainties, any kind of risk where you can't manage your funds, you can't get the funds from outside, you can take out of this provision itself the amount, the contingencies. Fine. So a firm should make the adequate provision in its financial plan. For what good cause? In order to meet the contingencies that which is going to arise in the future, right? Like arising in future after anticipating them, right? So this is all about the contingencies. The next step what you have is economy. What does economy talk about? See, the cost of raising the capital should be kept at the minimum. I have told you always, as a financial planner, as a financial decision maker, make sure you maximizing to maximize the return while minimizing the risk, right? So it should not impose any kind of what do I say, like unnecessary burden on the company, right? So this is possible by having a proper debt equity mix. Basically I'm talking about the capital structure, how you are going to form your capital, how the capital formation is going to happen, what is the financing mix you as a financial planner you are going to infuse in your organization. And the major thing is that a financial plan, it should consider a proper debt equity mix, which will keep the cost of capital of the company at the minimum, right, together actually. with ensuring that the funds are available in times of need in adequate quantities. So make sure you make ideal decision on this debt equity, the mix. All right, the last step what you have is the last principle is optimum use. Now what does optimum use talk about? See, the financial plan should provide for meeting the genuine needs of the company, right? Whatever it is. And when I talk about the optimum tells about best utilization of resources. Resources, here we are talking about the resource, that is money, funds, or the capital. So the available funds, it must be used very effectively and efficiently. That should be productive in nature. It should yield something productive, right? So optimum utilization of funds, what does it do? It results in availability of adequate liquidity, fine, where easily you can convert into the cash, where the cash is readily available, so that it is a concern together with the maximum profitability, fine. So when you're making a decision, all these things, make sure at the time of planning your finance, that is financial planning, make sure for a good or for a sound, which is effective financial planning, you need to take care of all these principles, and each principle will play a very vital role in making up an effective financial plan of a firm.